I'm Autumn. I'm a game artist and illustrator and designer, and once I used Unity, or actually more than once, because once I was paid for it, so I shouldn't say that. And my presentation is just going to be about the basics of color, because there's a lot going on. And yeah, even for artists, it's something that you kind of continue learning. And yeah, if any of you all remember the Monica Lewinsky dress thing about how like her dress was appearing to be a different color in different lights, that's just like a little preview. There's also a lot of different ways to represent color. So yeah, what I'm going to focus on for this is hue, saturation, and value, because that's something that's really easy for me to digest, and also it's easy for kind of creating color schemes. So this is kind of how it might appear in an image editor. You can choose the hue, which is just the color, the saturation, which is kind of like how colorful is that color, and then value, which can be seen as lightness or darkness. And then there's just another example where the saturation is highest on the edges, and then the value can be adjusted on the bottom. And the hue is which color it is. So hue, what is that color? So I'm sure most of you have heard about the Roy G. Biv way of looking at light. That's just all the visible light. And you have the warmer colors on the edge and cooler colors as you go down toward blues and purples. Something that I think is super cool is that even though you might have a red, you can also have reds that are a little cooler. And so those would be reds that would come off as a little less energetic, possibly also to pair well with like other colors in your scheme. And also something awesome that maybe not everyone knows about is that you can represent kind of like brightness and feeling through just using different edges of the spectrum. So Monet and the Impressionists and other painters were kind of the first to really take advantage of using cooler colors in the shadows and then just representing light as like brighter yellow, warmer colors. And if you've ever seen one of these paintings in person, it's actually amazing. Like I didn't like Monet. I learned about it in French class actually, and I was not very impressed. And then I saw it in person, and it seemed like the whole painting was actually illuminated. So it's pretty cool. And this is something that you can kind of like get more into, or you can just use a color picker at the end of the presentation. I'm gonna have a lot of different websites that have these schemes kind of all laid out for you, but this is just a good way to think about how to pair your colors so that the whole scene uses hues that work well. So for example, if you're going to have, if you're going to try and represent like your scene using one main color, what you can do is you can go with an analogous scheme. And so instead of having to try and randomly like trudge through and choose different colors, you can kind of think of it as either going from opposite ends of the warm and cool color wheel, or you can kind of try and isolate one color and use just like shared shades and variation. So this is an example of one where I used opposite ends, like warm and cool. And then I tried it making the background a little similar to the little dudes in the foreground. And then here's another one where the foreground elements are the same, and then in the background there's a really desaturated version. And so, yeah, in these different examples, the foreground is the brightest and like most saturated color, and then the background kind of just pairs to make sure that everything stands out, which is really important in games. And then there's another one. All right, so saturation, which is how colorful is your color. And for this, so even if the rest of your game has like a lot of variation, it's still really helpful if all of the player and the things that you want people to focus on are more saturated just generally. So in this example, the entire frame is kind of a variation of dark and light. What I did was I just like blurred it and I changed it to grayscale. And it's the saturation really that's cueing in the eye to the brighter objects. And then value. How light or dark is it? So I took just this main one. And then all I did was I changed the value of that top part and the bottom. And you can kind of see how suddenly this rocky stuff in the front seems to look weird. And that's because usually background elements are going to be darker than your foreground elements. And the top part kind of pops out in comparison to the last one. And this is kind of my favorite thing. I can't take credit for this like beautiful little man thing. But basically not all colors have the same like breadth of value. So in this one, and you can totally check out this video, it's wonderful. I watch it again and again. But he basically goes through and he has red and yellow, and then he just uses like a saturated red and yellow to try and paint this guy's shirt and shorts. And it looks kind of like mustardy and gross, and he doesn't know why at first. And so he goes through and talks about how yellow doesn't have the same like range of values that it looks all right in. And also he talks about how colors are really finicky about what color they're next to. So in this one, even though it looks like the shorts are super duper yellow, they're actually not that yellow, but the red is really vibrant. And so that's something that I find really useful for troubleshooting, like if you're looking at a screen and it's like just totally looks like the grass will not be green in a nice way on and on. Something that helped me a lot was just kind of like going through and desaturating one of the colors and making sure that there's a good balance. And then also something that is awesome about paying attention to value and maybe like starting out making your game black and white is that you can tell really easily what parts of the frame you're going to get attention drawn to. So in this case, you can see what the user is looking at or will be just by noticing the areas of like high contrast. And so even though this little dude is really small and like just as dark as a lot of the other foreground elements, the detail is so fine that, yeah, you can make sure that everything you need the user to pay attention to is really clear if you just go through and try it out with only value and not even thinking about color. And then I originally had like a really long problem solution thing, but they all ended up boiling down to a few main things you can do. This can either be done like as you're building your game, like if it's in a game jam, or if you're looking at it and it just seems like it looks like a mess. Simplifying it to one or two key colors, checking it in black and white, and then adding extra empty space or desaturated space can help. And looking at it from a very small thumbnail standpoint is useful. Oh yeah, and then also in Unity, I didn't know you could do this, but similar to image editing software, you can actually like add a filter to toggle it between black and white, and you can also assign objects to different cameras if you're trying to like get part of them to have a different filter. And then I think this would probably be better just posted on the PIGSquad Slack, but there's a lot of different websites you can use that will generate color schemes. That awesome pixel one that Dylan shared. Very convenient, thank you. And then yeah, I love the Circa dude because he has just like a lot of really digestible videos that explain it and show more visual examples. And that's it. Any questions?
Where can we find your art?
I'll post it someday. Yeah. Thank you.